individual rights and other restriction. I think it's important to write about freedom so that young readers know that it's something that's worth fighting for. It's something that's worth standing up for, and especially when we think about children in conflict zones and war, which is very much, I don't want to say in trend, but I can't find another word right now. I really, really hope that, through stories about freedom, children in these, the less fortunate children would be able to have a glimpse of what freedom really is about and hopefully get to live to that in its fullest sense in the future.
Swati.
Yeah, I think when we talk about the freedom movement, there are many untold stories which are also there. In the textbooks that you read, in your history books, it's important not only to know about the so-called mainstream freedom movement, but there are so many untold stories which are also there, which need to be also told. Also, I think we can come back to this later, maybe, after we've all spoken on this particular thing. History writing process, I think, is also important. When we look at textbooks or we look at books, we do not immediately think of who has written those books. Because the history writing process is itself very interesting and very important to look at. So there are many of these untold stories, like the stories of Birsa Munda, which I have written about, and the story of Jhalkari Bai. Now, those are also freedom movements, and the stories of, as I was talking about the history writing thing, history has been written by those who are in power. So the history of many of the Dalits, Adivasis have been left out from the mainstream. So I think that is why it's important to tell the stories when we are talking about the freedom movement. It is also important to tell these untold stories.
So true. What about you, Mandira?
I feel that it's also important to reflect on the kind of freedom our the leaders had envisioned. So for instance, if we are talking about, say, Rabindranath Tagore and his poetry, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, is that what freedom means for everyone here? So it is very important to also look at, reflect on the kind of freedom that we have today.
So the series that I worked in, it's called the Songs of Freedom series. And this is the book, The Letter to Lahore. This is about the 6th book, right, Hannah? Yeah. So 6 books in the series, Hannah and I have written in that. When I read the first one, it struck me that as children, we had some reference to stories of freedom via our grandparents, some personal stories. And it also struck me that probably we are the last generation to have that kind of touch with what freedom meant. We saw that passion in their eyes. We saw what freedom meant for them. We heard what they did for it in whatever small way. So that also became, that was actually one of the reasons why the series itself happened, to bring these stories to children who might just have a limited exposure through the textbooks, which again have a lot of names reduced to a margin. And we end up focusing mostly on a fixed list of events, fixed list of freedom fighters. And a lot of times when we talk to children, the only year that comes to mind is 1947, and that's it. But decades, centuries went into building the freedom that we have now. So that was one of the reasons. The second one, again, being that I spent a lot of time in Himachal, and that was, it was quite a revelation to talk to people there about what were they doing during the freedom struggle. So those stories, I feel, again, it's everything has to have multiple perspectives. So freedom cannot be a unidimensional reading of a textbook or whatever is told to you in a classroom. It has to come from different sources. So that was the reason that I, sort of wrote for the series. Moving on. What propelled you? I mean, you did give an introduction to why you wrote. Now let's dwell in it a bit. What propelled you to write what you did? So, Mandira, let's start with you. Children of the Hidden Land addresses issues that we usually brush under the carpet in the name of protecting children. You've touched upon the issues that, let alone children, adults like to just turn away from. So why this? And what was the process?
So exactly to what Hannah said, right? Like, we are very fortunate. So when I have roamed around the city absolutely freely. And so when I read about the stories of the children there in conflict zones.
Yeah, I'll interrupt you a bit. Tell us a little bit about your book.
This is my book. It's Children of the Hidden Land. It's set in Manipur. So what Hannah was saying, it's one of the conflict areas. The story starts with Hentoiba. Hentoiba is a 15-year-old boy who is flying a drone. All he wants to be is a robotics engineer. And he's very good at his job. So he's flying his drone, he's testing it out because he wants to see, he wants to use it in the space of ecosystem. So his drone captures some videos which really shakes him. And after that, he disappears. And once he disappears, his friend, April is his best friend, and all April has is a bag. And in that bag are a few belongings. And all April has is that to find out where Hentoiba is. And April has already lost her own sister, Alice, to insurgency. So she's very clear that I don't want what has happened to Hentoiba to happen to, what has happened to Alice to happen to Hentoiba. So she manages to find her friend in like a very unlikely friend in Shalini, who is the daughter of an army man. And I say unlikely because locals and the army are always at loggerheads in AFSPA-controlled Manipur. So the whole story is about Shalini and April trying to find Hentoiba. And through this story, I'm talking about the place that is Manipur and the state children are out there. And when I was reading about it, it really took me to a very dark place. So like children as old as 9-year-olds surrendered. So if 9-year-olds surrender, then, and even police reports say that 8-year-olds have been recruited in so it's not only the insurgents that are recruiting, it's also the state who are recruiting them as informers. As young as 8-year-olds being recruited by the state. So I've talked about some of this in this book, but I felt it was a very important story to tell. I did not, I just wanted to know that at least Hentoiba was safe, and that is the reason I wrote this book, that now it has become a way to have these discussions is something like, okay, my job is, it is so important to talk about this and say that, okay, the freedom that we have is not the same freedom that everyone else has in the country. And it is so important to reflect on that and to understand that.
That is so wonderful. And so while you were describing the book, it also struck me that I think as authors, we are blessed that we look at our readers, the children, as equals. And we don't really shy away from putting things out there. A lot of adults get uncomfortable with that maybe we should be protecting the children. And do you think that is the case?
Absolutely. I have only been asked these questions by adults.
Exactly.
But whenever I've had conversations with children, they have been very open, and the kind of questions they've asked has made me feel, okay, I mean, like all the reservations that I had, whether this is a good subject to write a book or not. And absolutely what you said, right? Like as equals.
As equals, exactly. So it's all in your hands, that side of the audience. Yes, moving on. Uh, in the Incredible Life series, Swati, you write about Birsa Munda, Savitribai Phule, Jhalkari Bai. All these names, again, they have been reduced to probably a sentence or a paragraph in history textbooks. So the research must have taken quite a bit. And again, why? Why not
Why
just leave
them?
it there? Why not just let them be in a paragraph and get done with?
One thing is that, the stories, the untold stories, unknown stories are always more interesting. But adding to what you were just saying, that children, that parents are protective about their children, I would just like to, just mention here, this is one of the books of the Incredible Life series. It's on Bhagat Singh. Now, Bhagat Singh started very young, as he was he was knowledgeable, he knew about everything that was going on from a very young age. And, children were part of these organizations, not just adults. There was this Naujawan Bharat Sabha, which was an organization of the young, and Bhagat Singh actually started an organization called the Bal Bharat Sabha, in which children as young as 12 and 16, they were part of this organization. So it's just that, parents are overprotective about children, or they think that, children will understand certain stories and certain stories will be difficult for children. But I do not think so. And when you read about Birsa Munda, you will know that, it's a very complex story. There is religion, because Birsa Munda was, the people he was influencing, the Adivasis, a lot of their lives are involved, in religion. So the movement that he started, he influenced them through religion. So it was not a simple, freedom movement. So I think those layers are there, it makes a very complex story, and I think it's more interesting to tell these stories of those individuals, those movements which do not come to the mainstream, and in the process you also explore the reasons why they have not come to the mainstream. This other book I would just quickly want to add, this Jhalkari Bai. Jhalkari Bai, you will not find Jhalkari Bai's mention there's no archival record on Jhalkari Bai, and that itself is the story. Why is she not included in the freedom movement? There's only mention of Rani Lakshmi Bai. And the reason is that, the Dalits, they are writing their own stories and saying that, our stories have been, wiped out of history.
Exactly.
And these stories, the story of Jhalkari Bai that I have researched on, I've written, the sources are those, booklets and pamphlets which are available in melas, on 15, 20 rupees, books. But these stories are there in the melas of Bhojla, where she was born, which is close to Jhansi. So I think these stories are also part of the freedom movement, and there's a certain politics in it, which I think children understand very well. And it's wrong to think that, children, when we talk about history, we should talk about, perspective and politics, and I think children understand that very well.
Correct. Absolutely well said. Hannah, the postcard from Lushai Brigade highlights Mizoram and how it was untouched. It was not untouched by the freedom struggle. So the same is with mine, that a lot of people, when we talk about Himachal, they thought that, oh, Shimla, summer capital, that's it. It ends there. That's the mention that you'd get in most of the history books, that's the mention. And I think Mizoram doesn't even get that much. Oh, yes. Correct? So again, why, and are there any personal stories attached to it?
Yeah, so as Tanu has mentioned, my book is called Postcard from the Lushai Brigade. And unlike my previous book, writing this book came with a fixed framework, so to say. It's part of the Songs of Freedom series, so we had to write about the experience of children during India's struggle for independence. But my editor was very open to the kind of story that I wanted to tell. So I chose to write historical fiction based on, it's about the participation of Mizo young men in the Second World War and how they were not given the choice of whether they wanted to fight or not. So they had to fight for the British Crown, which was a fight that was not their fight. And I also, my setting is from 1941 to 1944. That was during the colonial administration in Mizoram. And the reason why I've chosen this story is because the history of the Mizo community is largely written by the colonial administrators. The written accounts that we have are, our history was not written by us, so to say. For instance, in the colonial accounts, the Mizo people were described as headhunters. So we grew up believing that, our forefathers hunted heads all the time, but that wasn't the case. So what I wanted to do with the story was, write a history that is our own from our perspective. So, and the problem was that all the written history that we had, almost all the written history that we had were written by colonial administrators because they were the ones who introduced the written script to us. So the sources were not, so to say, reliable. So I had to rely a lot on oral accounts. But what I realized while writing the story was that oral accounts are as much reliable as the written ones because how do I say this? They are the real history of the people. As Swati has said, the way we are introduced to history is mainly through textbooks and people are reduced to political names and, it's always very politically loaded. But when you listen to the oral accounts, you get to, know the real history of the people, what they went through, their experience. And I'm so glad that I did this because many of the the historical facts that I gathered for this are based on the oral accounts of people in their 80s and 90s. They might not live they might not be here in the next 5-10 years. So it's also a way of preserving history. And what motivated me most was that I was able to write the history of my people from their perspective, and that gave me immense pleasure, and I really loved it.
So wonderful.
Even Birsa Munda was called Balu Birsa. He was seen as a madman who was, interrupting disrupting peace. Disrupting peace, and therefore he was recorded. He was called Balu Birsa. So the same thing, like in northeast India, in
every part. I think every
because the British that's how they had recorded it.
Yes, absolutely. So. Coming to the letter to Lahore, a couple of factors went in. I think the primary factor was I used to sleep in my history classes. As a student, your age, I used to hate my history lectures. And mostly because I think the way the textbooks were written, the way we were taught, it was just not interesting. So if you had asked me then whether I would write a historical fiction, I would have probably turned around and walked away. And in my head, I would have called you a madman, mad woman, whatever. So now, why this happened was, there are these snippets. When I moved there, I realized that Himachal is not all pretty nature and smiling people. A lot of things are still there. Caste system is deeply there. Women are discriminated against. And in one of the conversations that I was having with the children in the library there, we were talking about freedom. This is before the book was written, and I asked them what freedom meant to them. So the girl simply said, I want to go to the temple. My father worked there, but now we can't. So, which was very intriguing, that how does that work? So apparently the father used to carve things out of wood. He worked at the temple, but once it was I don't know the exact term for it. It was established, it was open for the public. Then he was banned from entering because he was not the right caste. Which was a shocker because as the typical city dweller, we thought that, oh, this doesn't happen everywhere. And then I started noticing that it happens everywhere. Discrimination is there everywhere. Uh, Even when you go to the cities and you talk to the children, and when they say, they usually start out by saying, oh no, there is no discrimination here. And then a simple question such as, do you have separate utensils for the people who come and work for you? And there you have it. So there is discrimination. So that was one of the driving points. The other being that there is still a part of Himachal where still women are fighting for their right for property. It is still happening. They cannot inherit property. So a little more research, and in 1921, where the book is set, that was just not there. Women just could not inherit property. So if one of the characters here loses her husband, and then what she has to go through is a reflection of that. The final piece of the puzzle was a meeting with Samuel Stokes' great-grandson. Now, Samuel Stokes, if at all you guys remember, is again reduced to a paragraph about how which foreign people contributed to the freedom struggle. And you have a list of names, and one of the names is Samuel Stokes. And in Himachal, he is just known as the person who brought apples to the state. Again, when we got talking, it was pretty amazing that there is this person who at an age of 18 comes to India and is fascinated by the country and decides to fight for their freedom. It was not his war. And yet, he did, in whatever way, he did help there, which sort of brings to fore the point that freedom is not limited by boundaries. The fight for freedom is for everyone. So you don't have to necessarily belong to a particular place, to a particular community to feel for it. You can work towards someone else's freedom with an equal amount of passion. And again, I think the motive behind the book was to leave these questions out there and get the children to probably just question that why. Why was there caste system? Is it still there? How are the women being treated now? Why is this chap, Samuel Stokes, just reduced to margins of history? So just those questions, I think, somewhere that propelled the book. This one is a little cryptic. What does it mean to be free in current times? And how do stories help? Mandira.
Of course, you have this political freedom and individual freedom and ability to move around freely and all. But basic things, right? Do I have security? Do I have education? Do I have equal opportunity? So some of these things are so important. Like if you want to uphold the preamble, right? Like of equal justice, equal opportunities, that is the basis of to say that okay, I have what you have, right? But like, is that so? Is that if we look at so for instance, when I was talking to people while I was writing this book, and it's it's something that April also says in the book. So she said that when you were being told, be careful, don't talk to strangers. What we were being told was, be careful, avoid the tear gas shells. So like you can see the contrast, right? Where is the basic security? Something that we take for granted. And an 8-year-old is being recruited. A 14-year-old is being recruited just by a pair of Hawaii chappals. He doesn't even have Hawaii. So much of poverty. Where is equal opportunity, right? If I'm talking about freedom, then I want that equal opportunity. I want that space where I can do what I want. If I want to be a mechanical engineer, I can become a mechanical engineer. And now this boy who, because of the civil war that's happening out there, this boy who wanted to be a mechanical engineer has got a rifle in his hand. I'm even struggling to say these words, but he has it in his hands. A 9-year-old girl who would probably want to sketch like if I tell my kid to draw, she'll draw birds. And what when my kid is 10-year-old, a 9-year-old was asked to sketch something in a refugee camp. What she ended up sketching was a bunch of children and like tankers on the other side. I mean,
That is so true. We've done this in Kashmir in one of the art workshop. The leading color that the children used there were red and black. So that was, and a lot of blood there, a lot of dark days were depicted in their drawings, which is again not a very happy.
Yeah. So like, it doesn't give the, like, for instance, like my kid is drawing about birds. That's all freedom, right? It's reflective of freedom. And here it's all, yeah.
Swati, how do stories help, and what is it to be free in current times?
I think I look at freedom, how should I put it, as a woman, I look around, and in the various things that we do every day, I often find, things in which women are restricted by certain things, which boys, I have a boy, and I find that, in certain things, like, say, marathon running or something like that, so few girls run, so many boys, like, he participated in a marathon recently, and there were 10,000 participants, out of which there were only 1,000 girls. So as a mother of a boy, I have to explain a number of things. But going back to this, what we are talking about currently, like about the freedom movement and in the beginning of this session, I was talking about the things which are not directly related to the freedom movement. It is important, I think, to know when we are talking about the freedom movement of the country, there are certain other events which were taking place, which were not maybe directly related to the freedom movement. For example, the education of girls, for which Savitribai Phule was fighting.
Yeah,
so I think as an individual, I constantly, when I talk about freedom, I think about freedom. I'm also looking as a woman, looking at those things which women cannot do, which men can freely do. I think that is how I look at it.
Right. Hannah?
Yeah, I think in the current times, freedom has a lot to do with, a sense of home. Because for me, my heart is always very soft for children in conflict zones. And, last year during Christmas, in my place, there was a ban on firecrackers for the New Year celebration because the government was, giving priorities to dogs and old people and that kind of thing. And there was a lot of protest from the young people saying that this is a curtailment of individual freedom that they have. They should be allowed to celebrate the way they want. And this is, I think, where freedom becomes very contextual. What is free for one person may not be, what we aspire for is very different. And, so the firecrackers were at work anyway. And that night, on New Year's Eve night, what I was doing was I was trying to put my baby to sleep, my 6-month-old, because the firecrackers were so loud, the fireworks were so loud. But I couldn't help but think of, the children in Manipur and the Middle East, how, mothers would be trying to put their babies to sleep under falling bombs and the, gunfires and everything. So, so the young people in Mizoram, like what they see as freedom is, on not allowing them to light firecrackers is, like a restriction of their freedom. But in other places, freedom is like a very basic thing, what they aspire to be free for. And even for you, when being asked what is meant by freedom, you might answer as, having the freedom to do the things I want. But for many people in many places, it's not just that, it's more basic than that. Yeah. So I think freedom is very contextual. And also, I think even in my book, when the brother was enlisted for the army, what the Mizo chiefs were offered was that either fight for the crown or don't fight for the crown. You have the freedom to choose, but if you do not choose for the crown, we would do this and that to your family. So, it comes with a condition. And I don't think freedom should come with any kind of condition of that sort. And how do stories help? As I've said before, I think stories in any art form, I hope that it will, give those children or those people who are under restriction and who are in captive a kind of, a taste of a glimpse of what freedom is about, and that will give them a hope and, a spirit to fight to be free someday. Yeah.
So for me, I think somewhere what I feel is that there is a disconnect between different regions, between children from different areas, different contexts. So one way that the stories help is just bridge that gap. The second one being that freedom does come with, it opens up the dialogue for that freedom comes with a sense of responsibility. As you said, your freedom cannot come at a cost to someone else's basic needs, right? It could be disruptive, it could cause discomfort, yes, but the basic needs cannot be ignored. And the third thing is that a lot of time we get asked questions like, oh, but what can I do? It's too big, it's too big for a child, when it's actually not. So when you read, that's what my hope is, that when a child reads about another child who's probably the same age and they are doing their tiny bit, it would probably inspire them to do their little bit. So let's say if a story is talking about reading or libraries, and of course, it can get overwhelming that, oh, how can I help? I've just got like 10 books. Well, you can set up a tiny library in your own community and use those 10 books to build something bigger. So I feel that somewhere that hope for the, freedom to actually mean something and inspire them to do something about it is really what was behind
also to
that.
understand that some children are privileged, the others
Are not.
are not.
Yeah.
And to understand their lives is also important.
Exactly, and which brings us to the next question. How are things different for children in areas that are farther from the cities, the so-called centers of the nation? So I'll just quickly start with this one. That usually when you are in a city, you face problems which are very, very different from the children in the farther areas. Now, let's say a simple thing about going to school. How many of you take the bus to the school? How many of you walk or get dropped by their parents? The ones who are not raising hands, I'm going to assume that you just live in the school. Yeah, okay. So it's the place where I am from. Most of the children walk to their school, and the walk is sometimes it ranges from 45 minutes to 2 hours. And when I say a walk, it's more of a trek, uphill, through valleys and narrow paths and all, just to reach that school. So something as basic as that. So of course, things mean different things. For the problems faced are different. So again, quickly, the children in your stories, how are lives different? I think we have to wind up now. Yes. Yes, absolutely. This would be the last one. And then you guys feel happy, grill us. Yes.
Yeah, very similar to what you said. And then on top of that, there's so much of poverty, there might not be even schools in the area. And like if it is in the conflict zone, then the schools would be used as refugee camps. So it's very hard. And on top of that, because like specifically in Manipur, at times there is no support system as well for the children, because the parents themselves are drug addicts. So children as young as 9-year-olds are also getting into it. So it's a very different life. It's nowhere comparable.
Hannah, the children in your book.
Yeah, I think as I've said before, I think freedom is all about home. If your home is invaded, then you're not free. So if you're somewhere else and if it's somewhere you feel at home, then you have the freedom, right? So I think it all depends on that sense of belonging and, you know, being free. And but I think one thing I'd like to add is that nowadays, if you look at it from a different perspective, I think children in the rural areas are, you know, in terms of physical freedom, they're more free than the ones in the city, because my daughter, like, we wouldn't let her like cross the main door because the moment she goes out, it's traffic. And people in rural Mizoram, their children go out to play in the morning, like they, you know, they play around in the village the whole day and come back at night, not a problem. So
That is true. So shall we? Yeah. Questions? Anyone?
We have time for 2 questions, and then we need to wind up the session.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So we've got time for 2 questions. So please put up your hands.
Right there.
So we heard about the untold stories and the stories of people who were always in the shadows of the freedom fighters. So for all of you, ma'am, I want to ask personally, what was the darkest and the deepest story that you heard that actually struck you in the heart?
So as I said, that you know, not linked to the freedom fighter as such, 2 things which stood out was, again, how the people were living and how they continue to live. And the other thing was that, so Samuel Stokes used to write letters to Mahatma Gandhi, but they also disagreed a lot in the way they looked at freedom, which was a very interesting perspective because, again, the way we look at freedom is that it's very linear, that everybody just fell in line. That was not the case. Everybody looked at it differently, they disagreed, and yet we are where we are. Would anyone like to add?
I would like to mention in Savitribai Phule, while I was writing on Savitribai Phule, there was this girl, Muktabai. You know, when we talk about freedom movement, there were, as I mentioned, there are so many other stories, there were so many other things happening. So this Muktabai, so in this story, there's a lot being mentioned on Shudras and Ati Shudras. And they were not allowed to do many things. And this girl, Muktabai, if you can, you'll find it on the net. You can read this, the letter, which was published in a magazine, Muktabai's letter, in which she writes, you know, the so many things in which, so many ways in which the Shudras and Ati Shudras are, you know, marginalized, not allowed to do so many things that other children did. I think if you can read that, you will understand, you know, how the plight of the Shudras and Ati Shudras around that time.
So, just one more question. Yeah.
Good morning, ma'am. Ma'am, my question is for Tanu Shree, ma'am. Ma'am, you told us that Himachal is not all about smiling faces and the beautiful nature. So, ma'am, what do you feel freedom is for the people of Himachal, especially the children?
As I said, just a feeling of being included. And I've been to schools there where children were sitting in different areas. And when I asked them, that was because they were not from the upper caste. So just a simple thing of inclusion, which we sometimes take for granted. That's their freedom. Freedom for movement, as Hannah said, is not an issue there at all. The kids step out at 7, they run all across the mountains, rivers, everywhere. There is no worry. And they come back by sunset. That is not, I mean, here if you do that, you'd probably have a police van looking for you everywhere. So, but just inclusion, respect. That's what freedom is for them.
Thank you, ma'am.
I think we'll have to, yeah, would anyone quickly like to add anything? No? Okay. So I hope, yes, quick.
Thank you very much. It's, I think I'd like to make a point because obviously we're all on the same page. But the point I'd like to make is it's always very easy to go with the flow and just follow centuries of indoctrination. But sometimes what books like the ones that we've discussed should ideally make you do is to ask why. or why not? And if you just ask those two questions, you'll find yourselves thinking about a lot of things that need change. So that is, I think, where the books that we've just talked about, that the writers who are trying so hard, from the heart to put their messages across, will actually find the sort of, it comes full arc then. If that is why they write their stories.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Madhurima. And that's a wrap. So all of you out there, be disruptive, ask a lot of questions, and go be free. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our speakers here. Can we have a good round of applause for them? The next session for JKLM is happening in the administrative building.